Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another one of our amazing interviews. I really get excited about our guests because not only do we get to meet so many different types of people, but also in today's situation, I get to reconnect. I get to reconnect with someone that I've actually known for years. And I'm excited today to talk about Dreena's journey, talk about Dreena's new book, and also talk about the community and really the legacy that Dreena has built, not only for her business and her brand, but for many of us in the vegan community. Some of you out there probably recognize Dreena, maybe even have a book on your shelf that you can grab and have these amazing memories about how she supported you through your vegan transformation, your journey. Or maybe some of you out there are going to be discovering Dreena for the first time today. I think this is going to be such a fun interview because we're going to be not only catching up, but talking about not only this amazing new cookbook that is out, but also talking about the journey, the experience. And I think for many of us, it's been an interesting couple of years, but it's also wonderful to sit down with individuals who've been in the vegan movement for a long time and have that perspective on how it's changed, how it's evolved, and how they've been instrumental in it. So, without further ado, let me officially again introduce my guest, Dreena Burton. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's a delight, right? So many years have passed, but it feels like, we were just chatting a couple of months ago.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about our community, about our mission, and about kind of the way we've all kind of maybe grown up in this community, that we've all been really pushing forward to really educate and bring understanding, knowledge, and also help people understand how accessible this
Mm,
lifestyle is to everyone. So, do you want to maybe talk about or walk us down memory lane
mm.
when you're thinking about all the cookbooks that you've done? Think about where you started and where you are today. Maybe just catch up our readers on just the amazing contributions you've made over the years, and then we'll dive into the new cookbook and some of the exciting things about it.
Sure, that's so kind. Thank you. So, yeah, it's been a while. Like I've been writing cookbooks since, well, I've been writing before 2000. My first book came out in 2001, but I was writing that cookbook before then. And as you know, it was a very unknown time for being vegan in the world. We were considered kind of radical.
Mhm.
I like that now. Someone said to me, I was doing a cooking spot on TV, and someone said, "Hey, you were vegan before it was cool." And
We
I
were
like
like, yep,
that.
I remember that.
Yeah, because then it was considered very, very fringe, right? And it wasn't a welcoming place to be, and we had no social media, so resources were limited. It was very old school. Go to a book. Thank heavens for pioneers like Brenda Davis and Vicente Molina becoming vegan, and John Robbins and Dr. Campbell, and people who put a lot of work out there early on to help us, people like me who didn't have the scientific background, to feel very confident in the choice from a health perspective, and then to learn more about the environmental and ethical perspectives along the way as well, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, my first cookbook came out in 2001, and it was called The Everyday Vegan, and it was very, very if you look at the cover now, it's funny. It just brings me back because it's this little veggie man that we compiled the image on the floor with leeks for a chef's hat and garlic bulbs, and it looks so vegan of the day, right? It doesn't look fresh
Yes.
and modern. It looks kind of fringe and a little old school. But when that book came out, I think there was maybe another 2 or 3 books on the market that were vegan. That's all. It was very, very limited, and it came out, but it didn't really hit from a business perspective. It didn't really hit where vegan was at the time, which was uh, a little more irreverent and to be kind of fun and offbeat and that kind of like rock star kind of vibe, right? My work came out and it was kind of healthy. Heaven forbid. the recipes were more wholesome, and so it didn't really get embraced as some of the other books were at the time. But I still believed in my work, and I loved my work, and was passionate to keep creating, so I did. And I wrote Vive la Vegan was my second book, which came out in, I think, was 2000. I lose track. I think it was 2004. Um,
Okay.
and that was just after, or 2000, having our first daughter. And that book, I included a lot more information about, starting to raise a family and what that meant being vegan, and what considerations perhaps you needed to look at, and introducing food to little ones. So there was a period of time with every book I had a baby, and I gave that up. Yes, after 3. So, that one actually was with the birth of our second daughter, Bridget, that came out.
Okay.
And then there was Eat, Drink, and Be Vegan, which was kind of like a celebratory book. Like, hey, here's what you can, serve for parties, and look at all the different cuisines that you can tap into eating vegan. And there's a whole hummus chapter in that book, for everyone who wants to explore lots of flavor variations. And that book was pretty well received. It was the best, I think, was the most popular of the 3,
Okay.
perhaps because it kind of, the title was catchy. It had some food photos in there. Not all recipes were photographed, which is a big change now in writing cookbooks. You see a
Yeah.
photograph for every recipe. And then I almost stopped because I was really loving my work and wanted to keep doing it, but I was making very little money, and I was raising children, and it was hard.
Yeah.
Uh, but something inside of me wanted to continue to write. So my next book was Let Them Eat Vegan. And then that was with the birth of our, our third daughter was born after Eat, Drink, and Be Vegan. And then Let Them Eat Vegan. After that, I wrote Plant Powered Families, and I switched publishers. And that was a big deal for me. I
Mhm.
had switched publishers for Let Them Eat Vegan, and then I switched again to a different publisher for Plant Powered Families, and they did a beautiful job on that book. And I
Mhm.
think, combined with the theme of the book, and the timing was very good. People were interested in food for families, and how to work with kids who are picky eaters, and going to parties as vegans. How do you do that? How do you have a birthday party? How do you plan school lunches, and all of those components? So that book was very well received. That's been my most popular to date, except now with the release of Dreena's Kind Kitchen, and we use the same publisher, and they did, again, a beautiful job with that book. So for sure, a lot has changed from sort of the content of the book, but also how the book was designed, and how it is visually received by the reader. My own confidence in my work as well, and getting paid a little bit
Which
along
I
the way.
Yeah, which is so key. I think a lot of times when we, start out on these journeys, especially like we've been talking about, way back in the day,
Mhm.
a lot of us started because we were just inspired. We weren't necessarily thinking about, I'm running a business. If I'm running a business, how should I be compensated? We weren't necessarily pulling out the spreadsheets. So it's really interesting as we've all kind of grown over the years, and all of us have started to realize that this can be something that actually generates revenue. This can be something that can be built into a business. What was your big aha moment as you started to discover that or navigate those
Mm.
waters?
It was talking to some other people in the field, some other authors, and some other creators, and being at a conference one year, and a friend that I had met online, and we were just discussing, and she was saying, people make a lot of money with blogging and royalties with their books. And I'm like, really? How does that happen? Because with my first book, and you can't expect what, I think, in the time that I released that first book, and also not having any experience, blogging was not out in the world. So to me, I didn't expect a huge advance, or to have um, that commitment from a publisher early on. But my advance for that book was $1,000. And you hear now of advances from publishers being quite large. And then my second book was 1,500. And my third book was 2,000. So I was just like climbing up there just a little bit. And advances
Yeah.
are just basically against your royalties anyhow. But you know, a book can be very successful, but it also can, you know, just be really a limb of what you're doing. So if you're writing content online and blogging and you're on social media and maybe you're consider yourself more of an influencer, sometimes your book is a limb of what you're doing and not the major revenue source, because it is quite hard for it to be the major revenue source, really, unless you sell a lot of copies. And so definitely a learning process. And then when I was speaking with those friends, I realized I think it's time to switch publishers, which I did for Let Them Eat Vegan. And they certainly did a better job in terms of giving an advance and accounting and paying royalties on time. However, they did a very poor job with the quality of the book. And then that was very important to me. So that's why I switched publishers again. So I think it was around that time, and I started to think, hey, I really need to learn how to focus my blog work to be a little bit more of a business approach as well, which is really hard to do when you're a creative person and you just want to share information. Kind of putting on that hat of like, well, I should also earn money from this is hard, especially I think, as you would know as well, in the vegan community. Sometimes you are approached by people who just want to use that angle of, but you're compassionate, you should want to share this, you know.
Yes. Yeah. And
Uh-huh.
that's a really hard thing to balance
Mhm.
because we don't want to keep the information from our community. We want to help. But I think there's been some great mind shift that's been happening. And also, there's still some more work that
Yeah.
needs to be done. But helping people understand that what we want to do is create these kind of vegan economies. We want to create this environment where the money that we make, the money that we spend, really comes from this ecosystem that supports our beliefs.
Yes.
Because if we have to do everything kind of in the vegan space that we have to give away, then
Yes.
that requires people to have to work other positions, other jobs, and some of those positions can conflict. So a lot of times I help people kind of see the world a little bit differently or see this kind of vegan not only life, but this vegan professional track as a way for us to really make sure that our professions, our skills are applied to the things that matter to us, that matter to our ethics, and the things that we're trying to change in the world.
So beautifully said, and a perspective I never really thought of before, that really we are, you know, helping one another and perhaps can shift out of something that is really not congruent with our beliefs in doing so. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then also, even when I think about you using this book not only to get your message out, but also the idea that you are raising a family at the same time. You are also being very kind for many of us to get a glimpse into what it's like to bring veganism into the family. Because for many of us, we felt like the trailblazers in our family. We felt like the people kind of coming in and trying to convince our family, but we didn't necessarily have a lot of people to look to say, what do we do with kids? Maybe, like you said, picky eaters, kids that
Hmm.
are developing their taste buds. So it's been great to even watch you on your journey and what you shared, because I think it's helped a lot of us. And I think that's why that compensation piece is so important,
Yeah.
is because as a community, we get so many benefits from writers, from authors, from bloggers. And we have to remember that we should compensate people for that, because that benefit can be just an amazing impact on our families and our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's easy as someone that is more creatively minded to discount that, right? And to want to help. And I've been in that place many times where I feel I just want to share that information, or I just want to share that product with people. So I don't need that company to pay me to share that information. I just want to share it. And sometimes I do. It really depends on the situation. If it's, you know, a small startup or someone that I know and I really want to support them. But a lot of times it's a mind shift that is required to say, you know, this is important too. And when you are valuing yourself, in that regard, it does change your output. And it's like this reciprocal thing that goes on. It's like something energy wise, you're telling people and the world out there that you're worth it. And then
Yes.
good things come back to you.
Absolutely. So if anybody's listening right now, I hope this struck a chord. I hope this is, doing something to you. Got your, goosebumps coming up where
Mm.
you're thinking about or realizing that you're worth it. You are
Yes. Yeah.
absolutely worth being compensated for what you do and your contribution to our community. I just wanted to say hello really quick. Gloria stopped by and said, "Hey, y'all." So I just wanted to shout out Gloria for joining us today. So let's talk about the book itself. Let's talk about the
Sure.
new book. It's so exciting, I think, when you have something new on the horizon and announcing it. So do you want to give everyone a little bit of insight into the book? Maybe even grab it, show it to
Yeah. Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.
So, if you're looking for it in a store or online, they can recognize it right away.
Yeah, yeah, and I mentioned plant-powered families, so I have that one too. I have some my own stickies. I put my own stickies in my books.
Yes, I have one. I should grab it out the closet.
And so, with that book, it was just really beautifully produced, a photo for every recipe, which nowadays is critical. People want to see the images of the recipes. And years ago, as we know, if we look at cookbooks from like the 70s or 80s or 90s, even, they didn't have photos. But now it's very, very expected by the consumer. They want to see it. So this is the new book. It's Dreena's Kind Kitchen. I always have to shift. I'm always
Good
going the
too.
opposite direction that I need to. And it came out August 24th. And similar to Plant Powered Families, the publisher did beautiful production with
Oh
lots of
yeah.
color photos. And the chapters are, I'm in the wrong way again, Stephanie. I'm going in the wrong direction. But the chapters are all color coded,
Mhm.
and the recipes themselves are very, I like to say, accessible to people. So they're wholesome, they're healthy recipes, whole foods recipes. But over my years of cooking, especially with the kids, I there was a time I wanted to have a lot of different steps and try to finesse things and finish it with this and saute these ingredients. I'm like, it's all got to get into a casserole dish or into the food processor so I can then make patties to make burgers, like not so many steps. So I've learned to kind of streamline my own methods, and I share that in the book. So in addition to the recipes, I offer a very comprehensive FAQ section that people tend to ask about recipes and ingredients. Like, can I freeze burgers? Can I freeze hummus? What can I substitute for this ingredient? Or, do white beans substitute for cashews? And those questions that come up quite often. And then I also prep people with kind of my behind the scenes. Like when I go to the grocery store and bring home a lot of produce, I get it washed, most of it, very quite soon, like almost immediately, so that I have it ready to use in recipes and snacking. So I walk people through my process. Like I get my groceries, this is what I do, batch cook these types of ingredients so they're ready for the recipes and also ready just for easy meals. Because, as much as I love recipes, most of us just need to get food on the table. And it's not always about a recipe, right? Sometimes it's about pulling those components together, throwing on a good sauce, and you've got a dinner or a lunch or whatever it is. So I offer all of that in the book as well, and lots of nut-free options, and just trying to make it again accessible to a lot of people, because over the years I've had people say, I love this, but I can't have nuts. And so I'm like, I'm making that for you. I'm making a cheesecake that is oil free and also nut free, and it's because
Mm.
and that's what I've done. Yeah.
That's really wonderful because I do think people are really trying to figure out how to not just do vegan decadence or
Yeah.
do items that are flourished, and those are great. I love doing it, and I love sometimes when I have time to do that as well. But the practical side of it is key, and I think for many of us, as we're trying to eat healthier, as we're saying that, hey, we're on this journey to make sure that we're getting the nutrients that we
Hmm.
need, one of our challenges is how do we do it in our busy lifestyles? How do
Hmm.
we do it when sometimes we're not eating at the exact same time every day, or we run out of time, or we get caught in traffic. And there's all these practical things that come
Yeah.
into our lives that can impact our goal of eating healthy. So, by maybe getting some of those inside tips, getting a little bit of your approach to prepping, cleaning, batching, I think is great, because I think that's some of the big barriers that many people have with eating a healthier, um, really just healthier food on their plate, just
Yeah.
getting to this vegan environment and plant based lifestyle. I think a lot of times it's not just the what do I give up,
Yeah.
but it's the idea of, practically, can I get this done? Can I
Exactly.
really manage all of this? And will I feel like, at the end of the night, I'm just exhausted on the couch?
Right.
Or can I, can cooking be something that nourishes me, not necessarily something that exhausts me?
Yeah, because not everyone enjoys it, right? I mean, I love to cook and bake, but not everyone loves it. And so for those people, you need to really help shape solutions that are very manageable day to day. And when you think about where people are coming from, if they've not been eating vegan, excuse me, all of the quick fix solutions have been designed around a meat centric diet, right? So
Yes.
uh, most frozen meals are, I mean, it's changed, right? In the last 5 years especially, we've seen a big explosion in plant-based options in the frozen food section, and even takeout, and being able to excuse me, order whatever you want to get at a local restaurant or something. But for the most part, and in terms of economical options, most have been designed around that model. So when someone's coming from a non-vegan diet, they have to then mostly learn how to cook again, because they've probably been doing a lot of meals or ordering out. And sometimes it's not so much their resistance to eating more plant based foods, but they just want to know how to cook simply. So maybe they don't even know how to make rice or bake a potato, and know that it's really easy to batch cook both of those items and sweet potatoes and make meals really quickly. So it's kind of like a return to the kitchen for a lot of people, which can be very daunting. And if the recipe seems very complicated, it really just throws them off too.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes, when we hear that, like, what do you mean you don't know how to batch cook rice, or,
Right.
a sweet potato? I think sometimes we have to kind of check ourselves a little bit,
Hmm.
because we forget that many of us really can build certain habits and move so far away from maybe what we used to do. Or in some cases, there's just so much convenience these days. There's so many
Hmm.
items that we can grab through a drive-through. There's just so many
Yes.
ways that we can eat fast, and sometimes eat too fast, so we're not
Yes.
getting the nutrients, that it is a little bit of rewiring ourselves. It is a little bit of thinking through, what do we want to eat? What do we want to stock? What do we cook first and second? And it's not necessarily hard. It's
No.
really something where it's an adjustment. And in our fast paced world these days, we have a hard time adjusting, even if it's something that's good for us. And even if something that may even be easier in the long run, it's that
Yes.
transition that creates the rub. It's
Yeah.
that period of going from the old to new. I think also that can create that challenge for a lot of people.
It's the change, right? And really, the only constant in life is change. We're always changing. But I have to remind myself sometimes, because, like you say, when you've been doing this for a while, it seems commonplace, right? It seems easy. It seems just life. It's just life. It's easy. Diet's not complicated anymore. It's just how you live. But for anybody coming into it, it is quite an overwhelm. And so I try to remind myself of, excuse me, that people often don't know those things. Like, what seems very simple and obvious to me is not necessarily obvious. And I also remind myself of, once we were, when my husband and I were first renting where we live, we were renting a condo, and we moved right next door in our building. And there was a man who'd been living there for 6 months. And when he moved out, he said he'd never used, like, the kitchen was immaculate. He said he never
Wow.
used the oven, never used the stove. His fridge had coffee creamer in it. That was it. So he ate out every single day. And I remind myself of that some people literally have never cooked. And that might be where they're coming from. And maybe they've had a health crisis and now they know they need to. And so it's, sort of compassionately welcoming them into that diet and showing them some easy steps that are,
Absolutely.
yeah, approachable.
Absolutely. Gloria just said that, she tends to cook and freeze, and it's really been a lifesaver for her. So, for anyone out
Yeah.
there thinking of tips, that's definitely something to consider. And honestly, I even have to admit, I think sometimes as like vegans for years, we sound like we have it all perfectly figured out. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, oh, it's just so simple. I go downstairs and make such and such and such and such. But honestly, at the end of the day, I'm exhausted and I'm
Mm,
so tired. I put so much brain power on my business
right.
that sometimes I do that thing where you open the fridge and you just stare and you're
Mm,
like, what am I going to make? And
hmm
then my mind's not on the recipes. So sometimes it takes me a while to figure out what I'm going to make. And if I'm too tired, I go sit back down and I'm like, okay, I don't know
It's
what I'm
toast.
going to do. Yeah.
It's
I'm
toast
like,
tonight with almond butter. That's
yeah.
it.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
like, "Can I get something delivered?" And then, and then my husband will say something like, "Why don't you make such and such dish?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah," because
Yes.
it wasn't in the forefront of my mind.
Yeah.
So therefore, I couldn't grab onto it and quickly execute it. And luckily, he reminded me. But I say that for everyone out there, no matter what end of the spectrum you're on that we're talking about today, the key here is that we all can struggle with getting food on the table. We can all struggle with figuring out what to eat next. And that's not a bad reflection on us
No,
as even vegans, as people going through the transition. It's really just something that we all have to kind of work through because even as our lives change, as our lifestyles change, sometimes, the way we prepare and what we do changes. And that's why I think it's
totally.
great to have cookbooks from individuals like yourself because they help us reconnect at times, or they help us look at food differently. Or if we've always been trying to maybe get back to eating healthier, eating more, simple, quick recipes, having a cookbook like yours can help us kind of maybe break through some of those barriers, some of those resistance, or maybe that brain fog that
Mhm.
sometimes I'll experience at the end of the day too.
Yeah, I love that story because sometimes it's our family members that remind us of the food that we have created. That has been good, right? And it's not always a
Yeah.
recipe, but sometimes I think too, when we're used to cooking seasonally and then we shift into a new season, sometimes we're kind of out of our rhythm for a little while and we have to remember, oh, it's like these soups and stews that I love making. Or then you come into summer and it's, oh, I love grilling XYZ and just throwing it into a pasta. But sometimes so I think it might be useful to make a list, right? These are quick dishes that I love to make because sometimes we forget and we all fall into our routines, and food is totally a habit, right? Food is a learned habit. Our diet is very much a learned skill that we build over time and we grow with. And like you said, we change, right? We may start cooking with new ingredients, or maybe we have a food allergy that comes up from time to time. And then we have to start using different foods because we've been consuming one thing for a long time and our body's kind of resisting it. Like lots of things come up. But yeah, recipes can be there's a saying that if you find one recipe in a cookbook that you use and love, then it's been worth the purchase, because that can be something you return to weekly, or you found one thing that just inspired you to cook something in a new way.
Yeah, I would so wholeheartedly agree with that because it's amazing when you can find a recipe that can be your go-to
Mhm.
or your recipe that, I always keep these items in stock in my fridge, always ready because it's a, family favorite or house favorite or even just a personal favorite,
Yeah.
for all my single folks that might be out there
Yeah.
too, because it really can create a whole new kind of definition around comfort food that can still be wholesome, can still be healthy, and still be tasty.
Yes, yes. And I love Gloria's comment about the freezing, cooking and freezing, because really that brings so much convenience into your world, right? In this book, I do this recipe renewal idea within the recipes. So for instance, if you cook this casserole this night, well, maybe a couple of days later, after those leftovers are in the fridge, here's how you can renew them. Like, here's how you can put a new twist on the recipe to serve it in a different way. And the same thing goes with freezing. If you're freezing soups or a pasta sauce or something like that, like sometimes you take it out and you can reinvent it in a new way and just kind of make whatever's in your fridge right now, like take that extra item out. Maybe you've got a pasta sauce in the freezer, take it out, you've got rice there. And then it's not a pasta sauce, it goes over rice with veggies. That's perfectly fine too. It's kind of thinking outside of that box, but freezing those items, batch cooking, freezing soups and stews. I tell people all the time they can freeze hummus and they're like, what?
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, it freezes really, really well. But when you make a huge batch of it then and it's in the freezer, well, wow, you've got all this, prepared food that's so much more affordable than buying it in the store, and it tastes way better too.
Yeah, I've heard about freezing hummus. I've never done it myself. So now I think I'm going to try it. I'm
Yeah.
glad you're saying that because, I've heard the stories, but I really feel like I should do that now. I'm
Time to try.
inspired.
Yeah,
I am.
I freeze it a lot. I mean, I have some in the freezer now, and I freeze cashew and nut cheeses and spreads like that because they freeze quite well and then thaw to use for, this time of year, I really rely on soups and stews quite a lot. If I could live off of soups, I probably would. I love them, and I just feel like you can have, the best, most delicious meals in a bowl, pretty much. And then sometimes it's just pairing it with a salad or maybe some sauteed greens or maybe a really crusty good bread with cashew cheese, and it's a delicious meal. It doesn't have to be super complicated, but something like a soup and a stew are those things that can be doubled, tripled, and then frozen. And yeah, it's very much a time saver.
Wow. You're making me hungry. Talking about all this good stuff. Gloria is excited as well. She is all into freezing hummus now as well. So you have two people already converted and going to be, reporting back. So as people watch this interview, as people are interested in getting their hands on your new book or just staying in touch with you and maybe being inspired to use some more of your recommendations. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you, either on social media, your website, or email?
Probably to pop to my site, dreenaburton.com, and because they can get my social connections there as well, and they can email me through my site. And it's best to email. There's sometimes when you get messages through social media, you don't even see them. You know that
Yeah,
too, right? Like they get filtered into
get
different
hidden.
folders. It's like, I don't know. And then people get upset that you don't reply. So it's most useful to contact through the site. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, as we're coming to the end of our interview today, I always love it when we maybe get some words of wisdom from our guest. We've been going through some crazy challenging times
Mm.
lately for many of us. It's also just as we think about pivoting, as we think about kind of one of the themes of these sessions that we do is the idea that we're always kind of changing as we run our businesses, as we even talked about earlier in today's segment about the journey from let's just get a cookbook out there to the
Yeah.
world to, oh goodness, this can be my business. Are there any kind of words of wisdom that you'd like to leave our audience with, or inspiration as we wrap up today's interview?
Yeah, I think perhaps, for me, a perspective as a female too, just uh, we sometimes don't always value how much we have in our talents and our knowledge. And sometimes we have to examine it as if we are looking at ourselves from another person, like not looking at ourselves from
Mm,
within, but as if someone else is looking at us, and to show how much we have to offer, because we can give so many directions with family and friends and children and pets, and having that other perspective of us from an outsider, then we tend to value ourselves a little bit more. It's been a bit of a growth process for myself, like that worthiness aspect. I think a lot of women struggle with that. And in this arena of being very compassionate, we especially struggle with it. So to know that, like, you're not alone in that, number one. And number two, you really do have worthwhile gifts to share, and should be valued for those things.
Oh, that was wonderful. I'm so glad you mentioned that and brought that up because, sometimes it can be hard to see ourselves from another person's perspective or see
Yeah.
ourselves even outside of ourselves. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. As females, it's an interesting journey for many of us.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a discovery of
Yeah.
ourselves, and a discovery of ourselves over time. As we get older,
Yeah.
we see ourselves differently, our place in the world differently, our impact in the world differently. So I'm really glad that you reminded all of us, even me included, to make sure we, take that moment to appreciate.
Yeah. Lovely. Very well said. Thank you. Mm.
So thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate you, not only getting just caught up with you a little bit on how things are going. It was nice to just chat about your new book. I'm really excited about it and finding my at least one, but I'm sure there'll be more than one recipe that I will add to my repertoire. So I'm excited, and looking forward to that, as well as I'm really excited about that hummus. I'm going to go tell somebody as soon as I
That's
get off
so
today's
funny.
session.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about desserts today, and we're excited. Usually, I get excited
Ooh.
when I talk about desserts, but yeah.
I'm a
um,
big hummus and dip person. Like, I love
oh, okay.
cucumbers, like raw cucumbers. I chop them up, especially for work. For me, I tend to be working throughout the day
Mhm.
and I need a snack. And I've been trying to get away from, like the chips and all that
Uh-huh.
stuff.
Uh-huh.
And cucumbers give me that snap that I
Yes.
like.
Yes.
But like you said, store-bought hummus is, it's
Yeah.
okay. I eat it, but I kind of get tired of it.
Yeah.
But if I can freeze it, you
And then
might
take
have
it to work.
changed.
You're right, there you go. You're like my oldest daughter. She loves, like, savory snacks and that kind of stuff, and I'm all about the desserts and sweets, like my middle girl. So, the youngest falls into both ranges, but
I might be a little bit about both.
oh, okay. Truth be told, right?
Yes, absolutely. But maybe we'll do another session again and we'll talk about desserts, because I'm sure people will be really interested in it, as well as, I'm sure there'll be another cookbook probably in your
I
future.
might.
So we'll be talking about that. And it would be great to just, stay in touch and keep everyone up to date on all the great contributions that you continue to make for us.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me and welcoming me. And your voice is beautiful to listen to as well. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone who joined us live. I really appreciate it when you show up and participate. It's so wonderful to see the questions and the comments, and also just, following through as we're going through this interview, as well as anyone who's watching this as a replay. Feel free to post in the comments. We check them out, we respond to them as well. And we love, love, love our podcasters out there that are downloading and watching and listening to these interviews. So thank you, everyone, for being here, and we'll see you next time. Bye.